One. Hi, everybody. My name is Craig Hardesty with Out on Film, and I want to welcome everybody to this conversation with the team behind My Name is PAULI Murray. This program is part of Beyond Film, which is a part of the Sundance Film Festival this year and the satellite operations that are going with the Atlanta Film Society and the Atlanta Film Festival. And so we are really grateful as part of Out on Film to be able to partner with the Atlanta Film Society on this project. And I'm really, really thrilled to have all of you here with us today to talk about My Name is PAULI Murray. So we have Cinque Northern, Julie Cohen, and Betsy West, who have made really an extraordinary film about someone for whom many of us really didn't know. And I want to acknowledge right off the top, as we are talking about pronoun usage for PAULI, you will hear us maybe interchange pronouns, probably defaulting to she and her, given that that's the time in which PAULI lived and how she wrote, but that is in no way to intentionally or otherwise misgender PAULI, but I think it is indicative of some of the struggle that PAULI had with gender, with expression and identity, and is central to this story. And so as we get started, I just want to ask you, Julie, I'll start with you. How did you come to tell this story of PAULI Murray, or how did the story of PAULI Murray find you?
Yeah, I mean, as the question suggests, PAULI Murray is for worse, I'll say, not even for better or worse, but just for worse, not a household name in America. PAULI's story came on our radar screen, Betsy's and mine, via Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We directed the doc RBG a few years ago, and in researching that story, became aware of the fact that RBG had put the name PAULI Murray in one of RBG's early briefs to sort of pay deference to the fact that PAULI Murray had played a major intellectual role in developing the idea that the 14th Amendment could be used for fighting for women's rights. So we were aware of this historical figure, and soon after the RBG film came out, we're just doing a little further research and found much more about this unbelievable, not well known enough historical figure.
And Cinque, how did you get involved in this project, and how did this story get to you?
Well, when they came to me with the project, I believe it was through a referral. And
right.
when they came to me, I had never heard the name PAULI Murray in any setting. I hadn't been taught about PAULI Murray. And so I immediately, started doing research, and I had a meeting with Betsy, I had a meeting with Julie and Talea, one of the producers, each separately, and it just it seemed like a fit. It was something I was really excited, someone who had touched so many spaces to really tell PAULI's story.
I mean, we were excited. I'll just say that Cinque was really up for the challenge of telling the story of somebody who passed away in 1985 and for whom we had a lot of photographs and archive and audio, and he was really excited about doing that. So that's when we knew we had found the right editor.
And Betsy, as you came into this project, this is not your first foray into LGBTQ plus history, because I believe you served as executive producer on the Lavender Scare. So what is it about this? There's a time period here that I am assuming that you're drawn to in some capacity. So kind of what is that?
Well, it's these untold stories. I mean, similarly with the Lavender Scare, when director Josh Howard, who was a colleague and a friend of mine, called me up and told me about the history of the persecution of LGBTQ people by our own government in the 1950s that continued for decades and decades. I was like, what? Really? I didn't know about it. And of course, it's a very dramatic story. And in the same way, I so you gravitate to these untold stories that you feel people need to know, and that put our current situation in a context. So, the Lavender Scare tells you an awful lot about sort of don't ask, don't tell, how it's a kind of backdrop to that helps you understand it. And I think, Pauli Murray's story, being somebody who was actively protesting racial and gender discrimination long before the modern civil rights and women's rights movements got a lot of attention, tells you an awful lot about the history of racism in this country and the brave people who were standing up against it. It just felt like, wow, how can we not try to tell this story?
And when you kind of think about your approach, so for Julie and Betsy, as directors, as filmmakers, you went from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, very well known, alive at the time, when you were filming that. I don't want to say it was easier, but she is very well known. So is that a different approach that you take to then moving to someone who has, for all intents and purposes, nearly been erased from her own history?
Yeah.
I mean, is that a different approach?
I mean, you can say it that it was not easy to tell RBG's story, but it wasn't as difficult as telling Pauli Murray's story. But I think there is sort of a similarity. There's one similarity in approach that I feel like all of us on the team agreed to, which is that we really wanted to portray someone as a full human being, not just as a legal mind, not just as a political activist, but feeling like you're kind of getting into someone's heart and soul a little bit, showing their humanity, which you can do if you've got the right audio, video, pictures. In Pauli's case, I think everyone on the team gravitated to the fact that Pauli had a huge love of dogs, and Cinque actually took a move that I don't think we had in mind initially, of just putting the dog right in the first scene. Let's all this, just like giving the viewer something to connect to in what could be either a very intellectual story or also a story that's a lot of pain and struggle, like having some humor, having some love and romance, having some dogs. And I think that's an approach that both these films share.
And the other thing about the dog leash too, I'll say one reason for putting it up front, in a lot of Pauli Murray's audio, you can hear a dog leash jingling in the background. So I'm like, if anyone hears that, let's just know right up front, there is a dog nearby.
Betsy, you talk about that, presenting a full person for the screen. As you're looking at telling a story that is not just a chronology of here's the argument, here's what happened, but when we talk about gender and sexuality, which one helped form her perspective on the world that gave us the world that we have today for a lot of us in the LGBTQ plus community, but also was what nearly erased her, which her gender performance was not in keeping with what would be considered respectable of the time. How do you treat that with such care as you're telling that story, to not further erase, but to really bring Pauli fully dimensional?
Yeah, I mean, that was challenging for us. First of all, to understand what the issue was for Pauli. I mean, luckily, Pauli had a sense of history and saved everything. So in addition to the audio tapes, which we were able to utilize to have Pauli tell the story in Pauli's own words, also left behind diaries, journals, and letters. And it was pretty extraordinary to be looking at these actual letters of Pauli reaching out to doctors and just saying, what is going on here? I really think that I'm a man, and can you help me? And I heard that hormones might be able to help. I mean, this is in the 1930s and the 40s, before, no one had heard of transgender. Nobody had a language, a vocabulary for this. And to see that struggle on Pauli's part was something that we felt we needed to respect. I think, the bigger point is that, Pauli felt like an outsider in between genders, in between races in a way, came from a mixed race family, was always the outsider. And that allowed, along with Pauli's incredible intellect, Pauli to see things from a different perspective, to be able to look at arbitrary categories involving, women, or what women should be doing, or what Black people should be doing, and saying these categories make absolutely no sense. And I think it was her personal situation that helped inform, the contributions that she made to our work, in her professional life.
And Cinque, as you're kind of putting some of this together, as Betsy just said, the tagline to this movie could be a very well documented life.
Yeah.
uh, as you're kind of sifting through Polly's life, I mean, is there a moment you get overwhelmed, or do you think this is either going to be a 10-minute short or a 72-hour miniseries? I mean,
Yes.
Yes,
how
yeah.
did you
You
make
see
that?
all of us nodding our heads. We were all at times, there was so much left that's not even in the film. Just to really not only fit everything into the time slot, but also to do the scenes justice, to not have so many scenes that you don't have time to sit with them, to let them resonate, to have some breathing room. And in order to do that, we had to remove things that were really essential to Polly's life. But I think Betsy and Julie did a great job of selecting the moments that were really like representative of Polly's experience. And then for me, what I felt was important was to make it experiential, to make you feel like you are not sort of pondering a historical figure, but emotionally journeying with someone. And my goal was to always make the viewer forget that it was 1940, that was, or whatever, 50 or 60, but to land you in a human experience. And Polly gave us so much in the journals and the archive that, just to bring it to life and make it human.
And also, Cinque, I mean, the way you wove the poetry and the music, I think, again, to give you time to sit with this, to really absorb what Pauli was going through, is part of what I, love about how you help put together the film. That really gives you the moments in Pauli's own beautiful words, to the experiences that Pauli's going through.
And that shaped her. Yeah.
Yeah, because Pauli was both a legal thinker, a political activist, and a very literary poet. There's kind of all different styles of words from Pauli that you're hearing and seeing throughout the film that are almost, feel like it's three different aspects to someone who is a lover of language and a very gifted crafter of language, and the language sometimes changes pretty sharply from really pointed but very formal legal point to a more heartfelt and often expressing of pain or love poetry. There's some love poems. There's some like really painful poems about experiencing racism. Like the language just does so many things.
And some of it still resonates today.
Yeah.
It is. She could have written that last week.
Absolutely.
I mean, which is frightening when you think about it. As much as she did to kind of pinpoint a point in time in someone's life, to have it so parallel so closely to today is disconcerting to say, to put it mildly. I really appreciated the way that you did weave the poetry in, and the letters between she and Irene Barlow. I mean, they're so beautiful and tender, and it captures the essence of that relationship. I thought as I was watching and listening and reading the letters that you picked out, how intentional did you make that as the vehicle to explore their relationship rather than just talking about it?
Absolutely. I mean, when we saw that these letters had been preserved, it did exactly what you said. It just brings you into the story. I mean, as Julie said, we were drawn to a love story.
Yeah.
RBG had a great love story, and Pauli had struggles with gender identity, but then did find this what seems to be a very happy and satisfying relationship, and that was so moving that we wanted to represent that as best we could. And the letters really I think are a great expression of what they meant to each other. And then not to ruin the story, but then what happens afterward and how Pauli deals with the pain of loss, and yet again comes up with a very unusual solution, a surprising solution to go into the ministry that kind of floors all of her friends, but makes a lot of sense when you think about the trajectory of Pauli's life.
And remember that Pauli's love for Irene was not something that Pauli talked about publicly in life.
Yes.
Even to close friends, like Pauli's Brandeis students who are interviewed in the film, give the really thoughtful recollection that, like, of course they knew that they were at their home. They understood that Irene and Pauli were in love and life partners. It's just that we knew she was. We knew these women, this couple who was presenting as two women were a romantic couple. But of course we didn't talk about it. Pauli didn't talk about it. This was like, because it wasn't talked about. I mean, that relationship with the students was in the 1970s. And I don't think that wasn't up for discussion.
Right.
Painful to think about by today, from today's eyes.
Yeah, I mean, and given too, it's not just a lesbian relationship, but it's also an interracial relationship at a time when it's like when you're watching this film and watching Pauli's life unfold, and you think she breaks barrier after barrier after barrier. And it's like, as you were saying earlier, Betsy, it's like these categories, she's like having none of it. So where do you, as you spent time in her life, this strength that she has to not only confront a world that she doesn't know where she fits into it, but can be so eloquent about describing this world and what it should be. Where do you get a sense of that, where that strength came from to do that? Because not everybody at that time was able to do it. Where do you think that comes from as you've spent time in her life?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is her family, her upbringing in this very, as she called them, very proud family, and her good fortune to discover books and reading early on. We just love that. And she found she had a stable childhood with her, despite it had not started out so well. Both her parents had died and she was an orphan, but she found herself in this pretty loving family that I think gave her a very strong start. That said, I mean, how many people could overcome the challenges that she did throughout her life to, get into Hunter College, which was very difficult for her to, take the stands so early on against racism, refusing to go to the back of a bus in 1940. I mean, that's, now other people had done that, but, it was not something that, that we really have heard about before. So at every step, when Pauli was rebuffed, she found another way. And that's a strength of character that it's sometimes hard to explain.
And Julie, where do you think that strength kind of really pulls from with family and?
I think the strength developed over time. I mean, in Pauli's own words, at the time she first came to New York City and was going to Hunter, understanding the deficiencies of early education in segregated North Carolina, the thought in Pauli's mind, as we hear in Pauli's own word, was like, I'm always worried, always worrying, have I got it?
Right.
Have I got what it takes? I mean, of course, in the film, we're hearing that through the voice of Pauli Murray already in, getting on in years, in probably 60s and 70s. Someone who is so clearly composed, thoughtful, intellectually accomplished, that hearing Pauli's description of feeling incredibly insecure and deficient is just a reminder of, kind of like the ridiculous consequences of discrimination that Pauli faced throughout life, primarily because of race, and in some cases because of gender.
And think, way, as you're kind of working on this story in that same vein, and going through these archives and putting together this picture of a person who personifies this strength and just sheer resilience, how do you go about kind of realizing that on the screen and showing that, she was in hospitals. I mean, she had mental health issues as a result of all this, and yet she came back stronger every time. I mean, what is the challenge of kind of making sure that we know that?
Well, strength comes from loss. And so I think it was just really important to make the loss experiential, so that, without that pain and without that loss, without that denial of access, there's no reason to be strong, because you have what you need. So I think really it was a matter of showing a whole person. And also it was important to me that someone watching it could identify, someone who isn't the hero. I mean, there's a movie, if you're watching a movie about someone, you're going to assume they're a hero even before you start the film. You're like, well, they made a movie, this must be an important person. But there are elements of Pauli's life that mirror, things that someone watching has been through, has been denied, has been misunderstood, has not been allowed to be who they are. That's such a fundamental pain. So just showing that so people can identify with it, so that when the victories come, then they mean something, and that shows the strength, is the comparison between where the person started and where they ended is how you show the strength,
And I think, we were lucky that Pauli had saved photographs from early on, and Cinque took full advantage of Pauli's face and Pauli's image. I mean, I think we feel Pauli climbing onto the back of a train, to ride the rails during the Depression. The looks in her face on the camping trip with a young lover, where she just does feel that she's found a kind of freedom and excitement in the midst of deprivation and hardship. I mean, those pictures that Cinque edited so beautifully, I think really help bring you into this personal story.
So I was just thinking, as I was watching this, and part of it was being able to hear her voice so much. The audio tapes are just extraordinary. And all of the photographs as you're watching her move. I mean, just her movement, her voice. And I will just say, I am a gay, white, cisgender male watching this movie and thinking, this person, this queer Black person, made my life today possible. And that overwhelming gratitude for somebody like that. And so if we can talk just briefly just about the dangers of erasure, because for somebody who laid the groundwork for so many of us, the danger of not knowing who she who she was and is and what she contributed. What is the danger as we think about in our own time now about erasure?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two parts to that. I guess it's like, what's the impact on a person like Pauli Murray of being erased in history? But maybe even greater, what's the impact of all of us of missing out on this incredible story? I mean, what you say, I mean, I'm coming from a different place of, being a white woman, as a cis straight white woman. But I have the same feeling of like gratitude for the ways in which Pauli Murray contributed to my rights as a woman because of fights that Pauli was taking on, starting all the way back in the 1940s, talking about feminism at Howard Law School, or at, throughout many decades of starting to raise an issue like, why aren't you letting my voice be heard? A female voice in an environment where there's such a strong push for civil rights. So it's like erasure hurts everyone, like, and just the whole course of human history and the way we think about it. Like, it's not just the erased. It's right. It's also the blank page.
Right.
Like, that would be much more beautiful if you saw everything that was filled out on it.
And Betsy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Julie said is true, and Professor Tina Liu at Yale at the end of the film talks about, the pretty profound idea that the people who are well known and recognized in our country are not necessarily the people who deserve to be well known and recognized. And Pauli Murray is certainly such a person, but someone who is beginning to have, a wider impact now. I think in the past few years, with the publication of 2 major biographies, with the naming of Pauli Murray College at Yale, where Pauli received a doctorate in law another one of the many amazing chapters in Pauli's life, in her 50s, went to do that. So I think, now, and an understanding of the struggle that Pauli had as a non-binary person in a world that just didn't recognize that, and probably would have punished that, or might have even subconsciously punished Pauli for that. So I think there is a general sense that Pauli is getting better known, and that makes us happy that we're part of that.
As we start to wrap up, with somebody who has played such an important part, whether we knew it or not, in kind of where we are today. I'm curious, as you've spent this time telling her story and spending this time in her life, what is a part of Pauli that will live with you? And Cinque, I will start with you. What is a part of Pauli that you're going to take from this that will stay with you?
I think one of the things that moves me the most about Pauli, and that evolved as we told Pauli's story, was to just unapologetically be who you are. And I wish we could show Pauli who they've influenced today by just writing those notes, like having the courage to write those doctors may influence, who knows how many people, because Pauli had the courage to be themselves. I think just being who you are, even if there isn't a language for who you are, that's an amazing amount of courage. So I think Pauli's courage is what I take away from it.
And Julie, what part of Pauli will live with you?
I think there's a lot in this story to stick in your head, but what sticks with me the most is really the poetry. The poetry, which is very very outward facing, like trying to communicate something to the listener, even across generations, even across the life-death plane. I mean, there's a poem that we have early in the film that's called "To the Oppressors," by which PAULI means white people. Right. In which PAULI really brilliantly communicates a strong message. The placement in the film and the way Cinque edited the scene leading up to that poem is something that I think is going to be deeply moving to both Black and white viewers. And I think it's the poetry in that poem in particular that sticks with me.
And Julie, what will carry on for you?
Yeah, you know, I think Pauli's optimism and persistence, as you said, in the face of all of these challenges. You know, one of the other very well-known PAULI Murray poems, you know, hope is a song in a weary throat. The throat is weary, but there is hope, and PAULI is always pushing forward to the next thing. And it's pretty inspiring to think about what PAULI accomplished. And, you know, Dolores Chandler, who we interview in the film, talks about, just think of what PAULI might have been able to accomplish had PAULI been able to be more open about the non-binary identity. So this is, you know, it gives us hope of what you can do and what you might be able to do in the future.
And as you were, just as we close, you do interview, like you said, Dolores, and a number of trans and non-binary, gender non-conforming people in the film who speak to the effect that PAULI has, and particularly for them. Just the sheer visibility. Now, as you were interviewing these people, I mean, I could sense through the screen the kind of joy of them knowing that there was someone who did this before them. What was the reaction as you were working with them in person? I mean, if I could see this on the screen, I can imagine what it was like face to face.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a mixed emotional reaction that all three of our trans characters describe to PAULI Murray's story. The sheer joy and gratitude at understanding how profoundly this person impacted their lives, but also a pain and a loss having to do with the fact that, just to simplify it, like that we all aren't taught PAULI Murray's story in our history classes in elementary school. Like, and like you can learn the story and that's beautiful and encouraging, but like it doesn't, I think, 100% make up for that loss. And I think that loss is all the more painful, you know, particularly for Dolores Chandler, non-binary trans man who's also Black and also from the South, and just felt such a huge, deep connection to PAULI's story. And, you know, that combination of joy and pain was actually both encouraging and somewhat painful to experience.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation about the film and about PAULI Murray. So I want to thank Betsy West, Julie Cohen, Cinque Northern. The film is My Name is PAULI Murray, and PAULI Murray is a name that we all need to know and celebrate. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The film premieres at Sundance. I hope that everybody sees it. And congratulations on the success of the film and the premiere. And thank you for making it and telling her story, his story, their story.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.